Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at E-Residency of Estonia. If you're a globetrotting digital nomad, expat, freelancer, or somebody with a business, whether that's just you or an aspiring unicorn like some of the many other unicorns that have come out of Estonia, then look at E-Residency of Estonia the next time you're thinking about where to establish your business. E-Residency is a digital identity issued by the Republic of Estonia, which is in the European Union, to foreign nationals, that means non-Estonians, giving them digital access to the country's advanced online infrastructure and open business environment. And when I say advanced, I mean advanced. They've been doing digital for decades. E-residents can start a company 100% online from wherever they are in the world, run it remotely, open business bank accounts, and even submit their annual reports, all with their electronic ID card. It's literally international business without borders for location-independent entrepreneurs, perfect for the About Abroad audience. The next time you're thinking about where to establish your business, look at E-Residency of Estonia via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. My guest today is Mitko Karshovski, and if you've listened to About Abroad for any length of time, you might have heard me talk about Mitko and his show, That Remote Life, which is another podcast that I love, and he is the host of that show. So he was nice enough to come on About Abroad today, talk to us about his digital nomad lifestyle, his roots from Eastern Europe and moving to the US and third culture kid problems, and then moving into what he's doing now as a professional digital nomad, training entrepreneurs on how to build location-independent businesses, learning from some of the best who have done it themselves. It was an awesome conversation. I just love catching up with Mitko, picking his brain. He's a veteran of the digital nomad game and just a really fun guy to talk to. So we had a blast. Hope you will too. Please help me in welcoming Mitko to About Abroad. Mitko is officially in the About Abroad house. Welcome to the show, my friend. How are you?
Dude, I am so stoked to be here. I feel like this has been in the works for months. I've been looking forward to it. I'm so excited to be here, man. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It has been in the works for a while. And for people that listen to About Abroad, they've heard me talk about your podcast, That Remote Life. And of course, you've had me on your show before, and so the tables are turned now. It's my turn to drill you, and it's also really exciting for me because your podcast is one of the handful that I go to. I'm a podcast junkie. I don't listen to my own podcast, obviously, so I'm listening to others, and yours is one of those ones that I love going to week in and week out. So it's going to be really cool for me to introduce you to the About Abroad audience today.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I totally understand what you mean. Like, I hate listening to my own podcast for whatever reason. I think that's like a very normal thing. Is like we start podcasts and we're super excited about it, but we never listen to our own stuff, you know. So, but thank you. I appreciate it.
It's so true. Well, we were talking a little bit before getting started, and there's so many different directions I want to go in. One of the things that have always been so interested in about you is something that I kind of know, but I don't really know. And that is a bit about your backstory and your connection to Bulgaria. So I know you're not in Bulgaria right now. You're in another foreign corner of the world exploring as you do. We'll get into your digital nomad life, but let's go back to the roots a little bit and talk to me about Bulgaria, because I know you were just there and I know your roots are there. So let's start with Bulgaria.
Yeah, so if people couldn't tell from the dodgy name, I was born in Eastern Europe. I was born in Bulgaria, like you mentioned, and I grew up there. I mean, I lived there until I was like 10 years old, I believe. And then my family won a green card. So if you don't know how the green card system works, it's literally a lottery where you put your name into a lottery and they kind of keep picking names out of that lottery every year. And my family ended up winning the lottery in 2004 and we immigrated to the United States. So I kind of moved to the US in this very weird time in my life where most people that I know who are immigrants, they either came over as kids, like very young, like, they were like 3-4 years old, something like that, or they came over when they're older, maybe during college, maybe for a first job, something like that. I came in like right in the middle of that, which I don't really know anyone else who's had that experience, at least off the top of my head, because I had like a developed personality, right? Like the way when I think about my life, it's very much like 2 chapters. Well, 3 now if you count like the digital nomad thing, but it's like I was born and I lived in Bulgaria. I very much like developed like a personality. I have very solid memories from that place. And then the page turned and I moved to the United States and I went through the whole school system in the US, went to college, ended up dropping out. We can talk about that if you want to. And then in the process of me post college trying to figure out what to do with my life, I got involved in the startup space. And that's kind of like when I discovered like the online business world and then the digital nomad lifestyle. And then that's kind of been the third page since then. So.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. That connects some dots for me. So that's really good to know. And so you still go back to Bulgaria fairly often, or a decent amount, correct?
Yeah. So I used to go back like every 2 or 3 years when I was living in the US just to kind of see family, do some travel. Obviously when you immigrate, you spend like the first couple of years are eating shit essentially,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you can swear in your podcast. I apologize.
Yeah. It's okay. We're all adults here.
Okay, cool. So yeah, obviously you don't have the money to travel in the beginning when you immigrate. And then once we kind of like got a little settled, we started going back every 2 or 3 years, like I said, just to see family, maybe 2 weeks, something like that. And then when I became location independent, started making money online, I kept hearing about Chiang Mai, which I'm sure, everybody who's, even dipped their toes slightly in the digital nomad world has heard of Chiang Mai. And the thing was that when I was looking at Chiang Mai, I was like, okay, I understand why this city is so appealing to digital nomads, but there's a lot of overlap with Bulgaria and the Balkans in general. And like I was born in a city called Varna, which is the largest Bulgarian city on the beach. And for me, it was this like very natural thing of like, okay, I just started earning money online. I'm location dependent now. I can go anywhere I want. Let me go somewhere where it's a little bit easier for me to launch into this lifestyle. And so I went back to Bulgaria with my girlfriend, now wife, Sarah. And so we went back and we try to spend the summers there because Varna it's a very low cost place, very high quality of life if you're earning in dollars or other Western salaries. And we can live a very good lifestyle for not that much money. We get to live by the beach, really fast Wi-Fi, nice co-working space. You know what I'm talking about. You live in Valencia. I don't need to tell you what it's all about.
I know what it's like in Varna. I know Valencia. I don't know anything about Varna except for your Instagram pictures. So this is super cool to know. Like I don't know that people think that. You're right. They think Chiang Mai, they think Bali, they think maybe Spain or the Canary Islands or so. I don't know, but Bulgaria, and I do think this area is up and coming. I don't know if you agree in that sort of, in that conversation. I think it's, people are talking about some of the countries in this area a lot more, but it's still not like where people go with their mindset first with like, yeah, I'm going to go start my digital nomad dream in Bulgaria. And I read and I hear that it should be on that list.
Yeah. I think it's kind of a big topic at the moment because I was just talking with, I don't know if you know who Yaro Starik is on my podcast. He's kind of like, I think he might be the first digital nomad, or at least he's for sure one of the first people to like write about it. He's got this really great story about getting an email from Tim Ferriss in 2007. He's like, who the fuck is this guy? Tim Ferriss writing some weird book called The 4 Hour Workweek. But so I talked with Yaro about this, and I kind of feel like we've kind of gone through like 3 stages of the digital nomad movement, right? The first stage was kind of these weird people. It was like late 90s, early 2000s. It was really, really hard to do. There was a lot of problems you had to solve in order to live that lifestyle. And so there weren't many people. And then I think 07, 08, the 4-hour work week coming out, Skype coming out, better internet connections all over the world. There were some of these tools like Elance at the time, now Upwork. These sort of things started coming out in 07, 08, 09, like that area. And all of a sudden made it a lot easier for you to be a digital nomad. Also, the e-commerce craze was during this time. And because of e-commerce being such a good vehicle for location dependence at the time, I think it made Asia a very good place to be. Obviously, a lot of people were sourcing product from Asia, but also you didn't necessarily have to work with clients directly. Sure, maybe you had to do some customer service, but the overlap was minimal. The next phase now post-COVID is a lot more service businesses, a lot more actual remote workers working for companies, right? And because of that, you need to have more overlap with wherever your clients or a majority of your workers are. And because of that, I think places like Europe, specifically Eastern Europe or the Canaries, like you mentioned, some of these like lower cost areas of Europe, although the Canaries aren't that low cost, but you know what I mean? And Mexico's, the Colombias of the world are going to be the locations to profit the most in this next stage because they can provide the benefits of Southeast Asia while being in Europe.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. And then, I mean, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like the actual timeline you just put together there and the 3 phases. And I couldn't agree more about the kind of trajectory that we're on. And it's funny you mentioned like the Canaries aren't really that cheap. I don't know who else would happen to have this, like make this comment, but just today I was looking at the price index of the cost of living in the Canaries. And I was shocked to find that it's like 50% now of what the cost of living is in New York, which is really high. Like that's by comparison, a place like Istanbul, compared to Las Palmas de Gran Canaria, Istanbul is like 22%. So, I mean, it's more than double the cost of living to live in the Canaries, which is a place a lot of people go, oh, it's super cheap. I can go there and live for really cheap. Like, depends on where you're coming from and your vantage point. But it's really cool to know that like there's these entryways to Europe through sort of the other side of the gate, right? Like you can come in from over there and experience some really cool stuff. We have a common friend, someone you introduced me to, who just spent a couple months there in Bulgaria and came back just raving about it and the food, the experience, the people. I guess he got to go to your Bulgarian wedding, like so. It sounds like a pretty good time.
Yeah, that's what I tell people is like, if you want to come, if you're like American, for example, I don't know where most of your listeners are from, but like, let's say you're American and you go to Europe and you want to come back and show your friends and kind of get the checkbox of like, I went to Europe, go to Rome, go to Paris, go to London, go to these places, Madrid, Barcelona, like get the check mark. If you want to go somewhere where your friends won't necessarily know what you're talking about, but you're going to come back and be like, I don't really know what happened, but it was a ton of fun. Go to Eastern Europe and the Balkans because you're going to spend way less. In many ways, that's what I mean by you get a little bit of that Southeast Asia experience where you're safe for the most part, right? Like, of course, don't go down the wrong street, right? Like as if living in Chicago is the same rule, right?
Yeah.
But also there's a little bit of this like grunge that I enjoy. Do you know what I mean? Like this is why I like Budapest over Paris, because Budapest is all the good stuff of Paris, but then you walk on the street and there's like graffiti on the walls, right? And I kind of like that. Like I enjoy that Eastern Europeanness, And the Balkans are very much like that. It's very like with Bulgaria, it's like Greece but cheaper, and there's a bit more of that Eastern European flair to it.
That's a cool way to put it. That's exactly what I've come to envision with this part of the world. Is it's like Greece with a little bit of a flair, and I also like this. I like a little bit of the rough around the edges. It maybe it's because we both grew up in America. I know you spent your younger years in Bulgaria, but I think there could be something to that. Why those of us kind of that had that experience growing up in a place where it's like things are relatively new, like things are considered old and historic when they're built in like the 1940s, and right, so when you come over here and you're sitting there looking at a building that's a couple hundred years old and kind of decrepit and kind of has some graffiti around the bottom cornerstone of it, and the door looks a little grimy, but you're like, it's got character, and for some reason we're attracted to that, and I can't quite put my finger on it, but I call it character.
I think it also comes down to perspective, because like, now I'm coming back to these parts of the world. Like you mentioned, right now I'm in Mexico. I go and I spend a lot of my time in the Balkans. I've spent time in Southeast Asia, and there is that, like, what you call character to it. But to somebody like my mom, for example, who grew up during communism, didn't have an option, lived in Bulgaria, moved to the United States when she was 35 in the hope of finding a better life, she doesn't look at that through the same eyes that we do, right? She's kind of like, it's, like, there is a little bit of like, I don't know if melancholy is the right word, but like her whole thing is like, I immigrated to the United States, and I spent my entire life wanting to go to a place where everything was put together and things worked and it was organized, and not necessarily like the mess that comes along with that. And I think the reason why we feel that way is because we can leave.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, it's a luxury. I mean, for sure.
Right.
It's a first world luxury to be able to like dip your toe in it and then dip your toe right back out.
Right. So, and I think like even for people who are like expats, like, or spend a lot of their time in that part of the world, like they can always leave. And this is the thing that, I preach a lot on my podcast. And when I speak to people is like, options are king, right? Like, you want to have the ability to, and this is why I talk a lot about like having multiple passports and citizenships, or at least access to different parts of the world, is because like I grew up in Eastern Europe, right? Like I didn't have the experience that my parents did during communism, but I definitely heard a lot about what that was like and the stories of it, right? It's like part of my like story, so to say. And the people who had passports to other countries left when communism came in. Right? The people who couldn't leave were stuck there for years and years and years dealing with all that BS. And so I think that it does come down to like options. And this is why I'm so passionate about remote work. It's not because like, yeah, it's really great to be able to take your laptop and go work from a cafe from the beach. Like that's really great. In all honesty, it gets kind of old after 6-8 months. The real power that comes from it is the fact that all of a sudden we've all become decentralized. We can all go wherever we want. We can get the best of all the different parts of the world. And we, in some ways, become these global citizens. And like, I just love the idea of what is the domino effect of that? Like, what does our world look like in 50 years if so many more of us start doing this?
Look at all those dominoes falling, right? With the gig economy, you've got things like crypto and the blockchain. I mean,
it's
these
just
things
getting started.
Sort of are united in this area around freedom and flexibility and giving people options and decentralizing. And it is just the beginning, as you said. And like it'll be really interesting because things from like a remote work standpoint and that, like these things have been expedited super fast over the last couple of years. And so you've suddenly got this whole fresh wave of people who are, I'm sure your inbox is quite full. I get plenty of questions. Like,
not as full of yours, man. Not as full as yours. I'll tell you that much.
I want to move to Spain. I want to start working remote. I want to get this visa. Like there's and you see all these people, popping up with there's courses, and so anyway, the demand is there for the ability to call wherever you want to call home for whatever period of time that is. And that's very clear and abundant. So you're right. Like coming back to how we got down this rabbit trail is like these 3 phases, and in this third phase that we're in now of the sort of freedom, location, independence thing, it's going to be super interesting to see where it goes. I have no idea what'll happen.
Yeah, I don't really know what's going to happen either. I think we can have like an idea of the general direction, but we don't know the details, right? And like the thing is, the more that we see remote work coming in, the more the companies figure out how to do it sustainably, because companies have figured out how to kind of like duct tape things together for a few years. But now it's setting in that like, hey, this is the future. It's not just what we have to quote unquote put up with for a few years. They need to figure out how to do it sustainably. And once you figure that out, then it opens up to way more hiring from abroad. And then when that happens, like you're able to be a little bit more free with, how many remote workers you have and all this kind of stuff. And then it gets into this kind of geopolitical part of, well, what happens when opportunity is decentralized, right?
Yeah.
Like the thing I like to say is like my parents moved to the United States for more opportunity, one of the things, right? would they make the same decision if they were living in Bulgaria right now, but could work for an American company? Maybe, maybe not, right? But it's an option. It's an option that didn't exist in 2004. And it gets really interesting to see like how that's going to play out in the world.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This season is brought to you by my good friends over at Insured Nomads. They're the absolute best in the business when it comes to providing health, travel, and medical insurance for nomads, expats, and really just all forms of world travelers. I know insurance is often something that's overlooked when we're fantasizing about traveling the world, but it's absolutely necessity that we address this because often the policy you have in your home country isn't going to cover you while you're abroad. And it's also a requirement, as a lot of people may not realize, to actually buy private travel or expat insurance, as it's called sometimes, to obtain a visa or even enter certain countries. So fortunately, there are companies like Insured Nomads to help us with this. Not only do they have excellent coverage and great prices, but they're also providing a first-class experience with additional perks and best-in-class technology via their app. It's an amazing experience. I can't recommend it enough. Now, this is a company that was built by world travelers for world travelers, so they know what it's like to find yourself in a difficult medical situation abroad, and they want to keep you from having that same bad experience. So the next time you're planning a trip abroad, whether it's for a week or a lifetime, check out Insured Nomads via the link in the show notes. Okay, now back to the episode. Have you ever asked them that? Like, would they? I mean, maybe it's hard for them to put themselves back in their shoes at that time. It was a totally different environment, but I wonder if they like. It's a big deal to move like away permanently. You know, like that's people. I think I don't know. I'm sorry to like kind of ask two questions here, but I find it really interesting because when I was growing up, you know, you're kind of told like the American dream sort of thing. You envision that every immigrant that's there is just like super stoked and thankful to be there. And you don't really ever think about the heartache that they had to go through, the things they had to leave behind, the fact that a lot of them would really much rather be back home if they had any opportunity to, but there just is no opportunity there. But that's not what you're taught. That's not what you think when you're younger. And so as someone like you and I have both lived in multiple countries around the world, your parents have their story. We know a lot more about the sacrifices that are made, as we've both alluded to already. Like, we're lucky. We're doing this out of the luxurious situation that we have, and we're fortunate for that. But a lot of people aren't. And it always makes me wonder, like I see people, I meet people here there's a lot of people from Latin America that live here in Spain that are like kind of here against their will. Like the lady that cleans the studio that I'm at right now recording from, I talk to her every Wednesday morning because I'm the only one here early and she's here cleaning. And she's super sad because her family's all back in Colombia, but she's here because this was the best opportunity for her to have some kind of a life. And so I find this like those push-pull factors about leaving where you're from are very heavy, and they're huge levers to pull, and I think can kind of be overlooked sometimes.
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it comes in at an interesting time because I actually did have this conversation with my mom about like a month or two ago. I can't remember how long I've been in Mexico at this point, but you know, she's heard me say this on other podcasts or on my podcast, and she's kind of like, well, I don't like if like her thing is like, even if we could have worked for a remote company back then, like the way that she phrased it was like, I hope that we made the right decision, because like the reason why they came over to America had a lot to do with me. Like they wanted me to get a better education. I've always said like, wow, I'm the worst son ever because like they sacrificed all this for me and I dropped out of college.
You're the worst Bulgarian
the worst
ever.
But yeah, they wanted me to get a better education. They wanted, like I said, like Bulgaria was an interesting place during that time because there was a lot of change happening. There was a lot of like hope on the horizon. In some ways that hope didn't quite deliver, in my opinion, based on like how things are going there right now for the people who are living there. But they made the best decision they could. And I still think that if they had the chance to move to America, they would, because there's a lot that comes along with that. Like my personality, I grew up around like good old, American, like work hard, play hard, like, dream big, like, this kind of stuff, which to like some of my family in Bulgaria is kind of like, come on, you can't honestly believe you're going to be a millionaire, right? Like there's a lot of this like mentality in Eastern Europe, while in America, it's like you are like, you want to, you believe something, you go do it, right? Like, and I love that about America. And I wouldn't be the same person I am now if I didn't grow up there. So I do think that they would have still moved to the US. I think the bigger difference though, and we were kind of like maybe the last generation that had to deal with that, was Google wasn't really a thing in '04. So my
No.
dad has this story of like trying to like use like Alta Vista or whatever it was called to like find Cincinnati. And he's like, how big is this city we're moving to? Because I can't find anything, not knowing that he's misspelling Cincinnati, but because, Alta Vista was shit. And like, you couldn't like, couldn't figure out that's what you meant. He's like, he couldn't find a job until he got there. So I think that there's this freer flow of information now, where I think a lot of the people who are moving from Bulgaria or Eastern Europe or whatever it is to the United States or wherever else, like they can come with jobs. Do you know what I mean? Like this wasn't something that my parents could do. My dad had his own company in Bulgaria, was very high up in our local society, so to say, in my city. My mom was the head accountant for the port of Bulgaria, of Varna, and she became a cashier at Myers, and my dad became a janitor at a museum center. So
Wow.
like they had to take a huge step down from what they were doing before. They've been able to rise up and they've been very successful now. But like, I think a lot of people now that are immigrating have at least the opportunity to have some of these things figured out before they come over.
Wow, that is absolutely fascinating. Was there sort of a brain drain that happened in Bulgaria and that part of the world in general? Like, because you say they won a green card, so was that because of their credentials, so to speak, in some way, or just totally lucky?
No, with my parents, it was just luck. Not that they're not very intelligent people, but no, I think a lot of the brain drain at that time, like late 90s, early 2000s in Bulgaria, happened with like tech, like IT developers, like these sort of things. My dad's like one of these people that's worked like a million jobs, which statistically speaking is actually very healthy. Like you end up living longer if you have a lot of different careers. But he was a teacher for a little bit, and he had a student who was like a little hacker, and I guess tried to hack something in the US he shouldn't have been trying to hack, and got a call from the FBI saying like, hey, you either come work for us or we're going to put you in jail. And so he ended up like immigrating to the US to work for the FBI as like a tech guy. So there was a lot of that happening in Bulgaria at the time. Well, not that specifically, but like they were pulling a lot of coders and developers.
That's hilarious. That's a pretty good offer when you break the law.
Right.
Good job.
They kind of got you by the balls at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Well, that's I can't help but think there's some, you're a full-fledged digital nomad now, leading other digital nomads. You've got a community of digital nomads around your podcast, around your community, around Parable, which we're going to get into. So I can't help but think there's some ties there. I mean, you've got some transient parents that move across the ocean and start a new life, and that's got to teach you from a young age that that's possible, and not totally irrelevant in life. You can do that, and I don't know. I imagine there's some things there. I don't know if it all connects directly, but it's an interesting parallel.
It's interesting because it's not something that I connected the dots on before, but doing interviews, doing podcasts, like one of the really fun things is you get really good questions, right, from people like yourself, and you kind of start to think about these things and eventually connect the dots. And I think one of the things that I've figured out recently is like I didn't quite fit in anywhere, right? Like in the United States, everybody knew me as the Bulgarian kid because my name is Mitko, right? It wasn't Michael, and I couldn't just kind of like fit in there. And I was very big about like I knew I could be called whatever I wanted to, but I was very proud of the fact that I'm Bulgarian. Like I don't want to be just whatever. But because of that, I was always the Bulgarian kid. Like that was like my brand, right? In high school. And then when I would go back to visit Bulgaria, I was the American kid because I had changed, right? Like we talked about, like a lot about my personality, my beliefs changed because of that. And I wasn't just like a kid anywhere. I didn't quite fit neatly into a box somewhere. And I kind of love that about myself, but it did also make me feel a little bit as like an outsider. And so I kind of constantly existed between these two spheres, these two dynamics. I don't know what you want to call them. And then when I stumbled across, I always wanted to travel full time. Like I always wanted to have the ability to be in multiple places because I just couldn't imagine closing myself off to 99.99% of the world because I knew how much was out there, right? And then when I found this community of weirdos called digital nomads who were like, no, I don't want to just live in one city. I want to live in like a bunch of different places, you know, and travel from city to city. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, my people, like,
Yeah,
you know, this
I
is
found
great.
my tribe.
Yeah, exactly. And so I sometimes say like as a joke that like I was kind of destined to be a digital nomad, but it's kind of true in terms of like my, like it's the only people who kind of get it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I find that that's fairly common in this little community of people that I've had on this show and, you know, talking to people like yourself that, there was some element of like trying to find yourself. And I think people are going through this all the time anyway. I know plenty of people that have stable jobs that are like live here, you know, friends of mine here in Valencia that are 35 and they're going, I'm trying to find myself right now. So people are doing this constantly, but I think there's something about when you travel abroad, like it's a great form of education, both for what you learn externally, but also what you learn internally. Like you're put in some tough situations, you meet people from other parts of the world that challenge your core beliefs, and you see the way things are done in a lot of different places, and it can help form you and help figure out some of those things that maybe you weren't so comfortable with before. And so I was interested, is what you experienced there, is that would that be considered like a third culture kid challenge? Do you like correlate with that term?
I don't know much about that term, but I do. When I did hear it, I remember thinking like, "Oh, so there is a name for this."
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Like, what was it that I recently heard? Solar punk. You ever heard of this before?
No.
Okay, so I didn't know what it was until yesterday. This is the beauty of the internet. It's like a futurism kind of thing that's very ecological. So like think like very futuristic buildings. They're all kind of like with like trees in them and plants and stuff. Just Google it if anybody's listening. I didn't know that was a thing. That's the beauty of the internet. But yeah, like when I did hear about the like third culture kid, like yeah, that is kind of like I guess a a, a tag on my experience.
There's this guy named Tayo Roxon that has a podcast.
I think that's where I heard it from.
Yeah. Tayo has a podcast called As Told by Nomads for anybody listening. If this resonates with you, because I think it is a kind of a common thing, and he talks a lot about this on his podcast. He was a son of some missionaries that traveled around from Nigeria and lived in a bunch of different countries around the world. And anyway, experienced the challenges that are associated with this. Because on my podcast, I talk to a lot of parents. One of the things I'm really interested in is how people are going to, in this third phase that we're in right now that you referenced earlier, like the next phase is people traveling with their families. And it's not just the 20 somethings and the singles that are doing this, but it's like, hey, I'm now 35 and I got 2 kids and I have the freedom to live wherever I want. I want to go spend 3 months in Thailand again. So let's do that as a family. And how that works is going to be really interesting. So I love talking to, and I will say it's also the number one question that I get is, can you tell me more about how to do this with a family? So hence I bring on a lot of people to talk about that sort of thing. And but what I find is interesting about that is I'm always talking to the parents. I never get to talk to the kids because they're like little kids now. But talking to you, talking to Tayo, I've had the opportunity to speak with him. It's super interesting what it's like living as the foreign kid in a country and what that does to you. In some cases, it makes you super confident and bold about who you are, and then in other cases, like it might weaken you a little bit in some ways. And so I don't know. It's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely going to be really interesting I think the next generation, like whatever the Gen Z is past Gen Z, I never know
what does it go
until
to after Z.
I don't know. Who knows?
They don't have
It's like, what was it? It was like, I don't know what year you're born, but like my parents are Gen X, and then it just went like millennial, and then it went back to Gen Z. Like they're like, we'll just throw in something random in there. But I think, the one thing I would tell parents is like, because I've had similar questions, and I've had some, interviews with people who are parents or at least experts or have some experience in that for the same reasons. But the thing that I do find interesting is, first of all, we're gonna have a lot more, I think, solutions to the problem of like, how do you do this with kids? I think that ecosystem is just developing. But the other thing is, I just had Abby Brody on the show, who she's got a huge history in like working in higher education and creating schools and school systems in the U.S., and is now developing a program called The Mix, which is kind of like a higher education alternative. And it's like, one of the cool things was, she was like, digital nomads are our people. If you're a digital nomad who wants to go to college, but understands that college model is not going to help them in their goal of becoming a digital nomad, like, we want you. And the really interesting thing that she said, we've all heard about how travel is so beneficial and how you're going to grow so much from it, and how any chance when you're in college to do study abroad, you should, because it's so great for you. But I haven't at least heard any statistics around that. And she said that based on the research that she's done throughout her career, and I can't give you the exact percentage, it is the number one thing that they can like connect to higher success post college. So if you went to college and you like did a study abroad experience, you have a higher percentage of success in your career after college than somebody who didn't.
I did 2 study abroads and my life sucks. I don't know.
Well,
I
you're
got
the head
screwed
of
in this.
remote at Duist, so I think you like, correlate with that statistic. So
It was the second study abroad that did it. No, I mean, I will say it's the absolute best education. Like any young person that I talk to, like a high schooler or middle schooler who wants to like has any interest in the world, like
mhm.
go jump in on that. Like put that at number one on your bucket list to do during college. Sacrifice something else to make that happen.
Well, and I think that has a lot to do with like, I know Gary Vee's been harping about this for like the last year, but it's like those soft skills. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
those things that we can't quite measure, but something happens when all of a sudden you're thrown into an uncomfortable situation. Especially for people who grew up in the US, like the US is like one giant bubble. Like, yeah, it's a big country, but it's very much a bubble.
Very
And
much.
you don't necessarily understand the problems other people experience. Everybody around you speaks the same language. We all have, generally speaking, the same culture. So all of a sudden getting tossed in a place where people maybe don't look like you, maybe like they don't have the same ideas as you do, and all of a sudden you grow a lot from that. And like, sure, you can't go in there and say like, I learned this mathematical equation, but you learn a lot of these like soft skills that are going to be very beneficial for you going forward.
Something I recall from my first the study abroad experience that I had was I went to Austria, and which European country, like very not in the scheme
You
of things
figured
on the
out.
spectrum,
Yeah.
it wasn't too different. It wasn't in Uganda. I
Right.
felt it was pretty easy relatively, especially after some of the places I've lived now. But at the time I was young, and I was like, okay, this is my first real experience being somewhere for a long period of time. The thing I recall really learning and changing was that I had this like obsession kind of like beat into my mind as an American that like number one, it's like what is it from Talladega Nights? Like, if you ain't first, you're last kind of thing. And about
Yeah.
everything, like it was just like a winner's mentality, and like you could correlate that to anything. Like, be really successful at your job, like make lots of money, have multiple houses, multiple cars, and it's not just about the possessions. That's too easy to go to, but there was this mentality. And I remember like through that experience, talking to locals and getting to know stuff just from like the classes and meeting other students there from around the world. Like, that was totally just something in our head. Like, that was only important, not only, but mainly really important in America. And like all these other people were like living much more relaxed and like laid back and not worried about the second house or the third car or the retirement fund being XYZ. It was just like, they were like, yeah, we're just kind of like chilling. Like we're good. I don't know. And I remember really being like shocked by that. And like to the point where I had like an internship set up when I came back, and I opted out of doing the internship and did something totally different that summer. Went like worked from like hung out with my uncle in Florida. Anyway, just it changed me. That mentality definitely changed me.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, first of all, but I think the interesting thing there though is that like that ambition that we assign with the US of like 3 houses and I have to have a nice car, and like that's kind of like the negative side effect of that ambition, but it's also that same, it's one half of the other half maybe being the amount of progress that the United States has, brought to the world. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a reason why so many of these giant companies that have done so many good things for the world start in the United States, right? Like I had this conversation with my parents as well, where it's like, yeah, it's great to, live in Spain or Greece or Italy or wherever and have this more like relaxed lifestyle where you sit down, have dinner for 2.5 hours with your family. And I'm all for that, right? But there's a reason why like Uber didn't start in Italy, right?
Right.
And I think for me the beauty is like the next generation having the best of both worlds, where it's like, can you have the ability to sit down with your family and be present and not look at your phone all the time for 2 hours and enjoy that dinner and have really good conversations and know when to slow down, but also know when to have that US branded ambition of like, I'm gonna murder the world in like a I'm gonna kick ass and do everything and be like the top dog, and then be able to again go into kind of like a slowdown period. Because I do think it's usually like balance is the answer, right?
That's
Like it's never one of the extremes. And I think that's really interesting. Like imagine maybe this new generation of third world kids who've their parents are American, so they got brainwashed with like, if you're not first, you're last kind of stuff, but then spent 3 months in Italy and they were like, oh, these people are actually pretty chill and they're happy. You know what I mean? Like what happens when that's part of your growing up,
Yeah. Yeah. When it becomes part of the curriculum of life. Yeah. I mean, I 100% agree. The balance is key. And that's exactly what I was saying, to make sure that it was clear. And I didn't return and say like, ambition sucks, I'm not interested in
Right.
success anymore. But what it did is it balanced that seesaw out for me a little bit. And I said, there's more to this. So for instance, like I had an internship set up that I wasn't super excited about. I was going to work really hard. I was going to make probably good money for an intern, a college intern at that time. But I wasn't like stoked about it. I didn't want to go down that career path. I knew that.
Mm-hmm.
And so instead I went and like worked for my uncle for the summer, picked up a different skill set, made some less money, spent time with friends and family, and didn't really further my career, but got a little experience and made a little money. And so that was that like balancing act that I can correlate those two things directly. And it's much less about my internship experience after a study abroad, but I think it's more about like getting that like worldly view and what that does for you, and that balance that creates.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good example, actually, of something that Mark Manson says, which is that travel has I always screw this up. I can never remember exactly what he calls it, and I never sound as smart as he does. A slowdown on like the return of investment of travel, right? Like, because that first experience that you mentioned, right, it had such a big impact on your life. It really kind of like made you think about things differently. You made a very big action and a very big decision based on that experience. But that first experience won't, or I should say the 10th country that you visit won't be as impactful as the first. And the 100th country that you visit won't be as impactful as the 10th. And so this is one of the things I think that we as digital nomads or travelers need to understand, is that we almost like, it becomes part of our personality. And it's like, I'm a traveler and I'm going to a new country every month. And if I don't visit all 170, I don't know how many countries there are in the world, then like I'm not a great traveler. But the reality is that those first 10, 20 countries that you visit will likely bring 80% of the impact and growth that you're trying to find, as long as you do it right and you don't just like, go to a hotel, in the hotel zone in Cancun, for example. Or the next countries that you visit need to be extreme in terms of like what they like you were like, instead of going to Europe, go to Uganda, right? And like live with like, tribesmen there or whatever, you know what I mean? Like that will certainly be a very impactful experience. But I do think that that is something that we as digital nomads, as travelers need to talk about, is like, there is a time where like, if you've been to 10, 20, 30 countries, you've likely gotten a majority of the benefit of that. So now it's like maybe time to think about something else, right? Like what's the next step in my growth, right? So for me, it was like, okay, I went to a whole bunch of countries when I first got my digital nomad wings, as I call it, which is the normal thing. Is like, you were like, great, every place I want to go there, right? But then afterwards, you kind of slow down and you're like, okay, how do I make this sustainable? Like, let me build a business that is more than just like cash in, cash out, and that it's something that I can, like, lean on. And like, so I think that that's also like an important thing to talk about in terms of travel and the growth that it comes from it, is that like you can get a majority of the growth by not having to go to every country in the world.
Yeah. That diminishing return is
diminishing return. Point. That's what I was. Yeah.
Oh, did you not say? Okay. Well,
I can always forget diminishing. I'm like, why is that word so hard for me?
Well, you're the Bulgarian kid, man. I mean, you can't be expected to learn words like that. That is fascinating, and I'm experiencing a bit of that at this. I think I'm in a new phase of that a little bit, where I'm like, I love traveling. It's a core part of who I am, but when I go, it's not quite what it used to. It's hard to like be super amazed, when you've seen a lot, when you've checked off a lot of the things that you really wanted to check off. So it's interesting. And I think we get that sense of excitement and rush, like you're building Parable right now, which this is a perfect time to talk about it. Like I want to know more about Parable, because
nice
I know about it,
man.
Well, that's what we get excited about now, right? Like you're doing Parable from Mexico. That's a cool thing. And so maybe that's where we get our little, we're junkies. That's where we get our little high from these days. So I don't know. Yeah. Tell us about Parable.
Yeah, that was like the podcaster in me going like, ooh, Chase did this segue very nicely. Parable, really, I've spent a lot of time working with people who are trying to build businesses and trying to help them figure out how to do this thing in a location independent way. And the thing that I realized was that there's a lot of courses out there, right? Like there's a course to teach you how to do everything. Like there's never been so much information in the world to help you build a business. But the thing is that I wasn't seeing quite the success rate that you would expect based on how much information is out there. And for me, like my big belief is that like the best way to learn how to build a business is to like go out there and build a business. It's going to suck. It's going to take you a long time. You're going to fall down a lot. It's going to be hard, right? Like ask anybody who's built a business. It wasn't easy. But guess what? You go through that process, you're going to figure it out, right? And that's part of that entrepreneurial mindset. But when looking at higher education, and I know that sounds funny coming from the dropout, but looking at how the best business schools teach students how to go out and be good entrepreneurs afterwards is case studies, because you get to really put yourself in the shoes of the founder, understand the sort of problems and challenges those entrepreneurs faced, and then how did they solve it? Like you kind of get to work through that with them. You get to see how the business operates, and you can gain a lot of experience from that to make your life a little bit easier when you go out there and do it yourself. And I didn't really see a good option for that in the way that we know business, right? Like I talked with some people who went to Harvard Business School who've been through some of these case studies. They're like, the case studies are still from the 80s, right? Like, yes, they have some current ones, but there's a good portion of them that are pre-internet. And to me, that's kind of shocking because the internet changed everything, right? And so I wanted to create a case study program that was all about business in the world that we live, in a world in which remote work is assumed and you are not required to be anywhere in the world. You interact with all your customers or clients online. And so that's what Parable is. We produce case studies of real location-dependent businesses between $100,000 and $10 million a year, so that our members can like really go in there and figure out like, oh, how does this business work? How much money do they make? How do they get their clients? How do they get their customers? What happened between year 5 and 6 of the business that helped the revenue grow 150%, right? Like really diving in there and understanding these leverage points in the business are so critical for when you go out there and do it yourself.
Man, and so are you interacting on like a pretty deep level with these founders, or are you studying them from a distance and presenting their learnings from what you gather?
Yeah, so it's a 1.5 hour interview with over 100 questions, which so our members get access to the video so they can actually, because you can't really, like, some of these answers are not like 2 sentence answers. Like, you really need to kind of like listen through it. And the videos are divided up into chapters based on the question. So you can jump right into the question that's the most interesting to you. But we also pull out the more, I'd say, like, quote unquote analytical data, and we make those into visual infographics so that you can kind of get that visual understanding. So like I said, it's one thing to look at the revenue in a spreadsheet. It's a whole different thing to put it in a graph and notice that from one year to the next, there was a huge jump in revenue, right? Like, this was a case study that we recently did. They more than doubled their revenue in 1 year. And I was like, okay, I need to understand what happened in that year, right? And so having that visual view of the business is also really helpful. So it's a 1.5 hour interview, like I said, and then you get access to the full video interview and all the analytical data presented in infographics.
Wow. That's awesome. What's the experience like for the founders that you're talking to? Are they enjoying being a part of the ride?
That was like one of my to be completely transparent, it was like one of my big like worries was like,
Sure.
why would people give me this information? I ask a lot of like personal questions, so to say, like, people don't necessarily want to talk about how much revenue they make and, all that kind of stuff. I think the fact that it is a closed community and it's not just something that I'm posting all over the internet helps, but people, like, they get it, man. Like, a lot of these people like have been through the same thing. And like, I've heard multiple times people say like, I wish I had this when I was getting started because it would have made life a lot easier, so they get it. The other thing as well is like, I think they get value going through the process of explaining these things as well. And one of the final pieces of value that we offer to founders, but also this is a really big benefit for members as well, is every case study ends in a current challenge. So the founder gets to come on and say, hey, here's what we're struggling with right now. Here are the problems that we're trying to solve. And as a group, as a community, our members go in and try to solve that. They try to come up with a thesis, a theory of how to solve that problem. And the reason why that's so important is like, one, the founder gets access to all of this brainstorming. But on the member side, I call it entrepreneurial gym, right? You need to go into the gym and lift some weights in order to grow that muscle. As somebody who just got back into the gym after a period of not being in there, trust me, I have some muscle fatigue right now. But that's how muscles grow, right? And that is all entrepreneurship is. It's problem solving at scale. And that's why you get these entrepreneurs who've been in the game for years and years, and why they're such bosses is because they know how to solve problems. And when you're just getting started, it's so beneficial for you to get into that entrepreneurial gym, get real like business problems that an actual founder is struggling with right now, and try to solve it for them. So that's a really kind of big benefit for the founders, getting that brainstorming, that outside input, but also it's very beneficial for the members themselves.
Yeah, it's an obvious win-win. What does the demographic look like of your members? Like, what are they? Who's listening to the podcast right now would be interested in joining Parable as a member?
Yeah, so it's interesting because we're just getting started, honestly. Like, we just left the beta about 2 weeks ago, so we don't have like a huge set of founders, which is also why the price is so low at the moment. Everybody's barking at me. That's like my friend that's in my corner. It says like, you need to raise the price of this. But at the moment, I'd say it's about 75% people who are just getting started, or people who have an expertise in something. Maybe they've like dabbled in freelancing, but they haven't quite yet made it sustainable, and they want to figure out how to make it sustainable, or go full time into it. So that's about 75%. And then the other 25% are this kind of interesting mix of established founders who are just interested in seeing what other people are doing. They want to connect with other people who have been in our case studies. Or I am also getting people who are from very specific industries who are saying things like, I want to see what other people in my industry are doing, or I want to see what other people in other industries are doing and what's working
Yeah.
for them that I can bring into my industry.
That's super valuable. I participate in a coaching circle once a month meeting with like 5 other people that's led by a business coach that we talk almost none about business really. We're in 5 different industries, in 5 different positions in various types of companies, like at different sizes and backgrounds. I mean, some of us couldn't be more different day to day, but like we all bring a different element to the group, and it's amazing. Sometimes I'm like, how did I get something applicable to my day today from the guy who like leads a division of one of the big 4 tax firms, like there's no connection there at all, but there's something to be said for bringing the meeting of the minds from different corners of the world, different industries, different vantage points, and seeing what happens. It sounds like that's the kind of community you're building there. And I think it sounds awesome. I'm really curious to ask you, do you think, cause I want to help this group of people, and I know I have them listening to this show, and I know they're listening to your show also. Can Parable be something that can help those people that want to break into the remote entrepreneurial world? Like they want to be, they're stuck. I talked to the guy the other day that's like, he's a beer rep, right? And he's like, I have to be in my little, he's like, I'm a beer rep, man. I have to be in my little bubble of zip codes. I have to see my customers. How do I get into the remote world? Because I want to be location independent. And through entrepreneurship, I think that's very possible. Is Parable a good place for that person?
Yeah, I'd say 100%, because so first of all, one of the big things that I'm really big on is action. I don't care if you're right, just try it, right? Like ask any person who is an experienced entrepreneur, like the number of times that I get answers from really smart people that I'm like, how did you know to do that? And like, I didn't know. I just kind of went with it, right? Like, and that's kind of what entrepreneurship is. So it's like, first of all, like no one's going to give you the answer. I've spent the last 10 years trying to find this golden nugget of information that solves everything and it's like a clear success. No one has that because it doesn't exist. The way to do it is to like take action and be bold in that, and just be in a position to always know that if you fail, you need to learn from it, right? So that's like the one thing. The second thing that I'd say in what we help with Parable, and the reason why I was saying that first thing is that's like a really, like, I think people get a little bit annoyed from me where they ask me questions and they expect me to have an answer. I'm like, I don't know, go and try it and like let me know how it happens. And then we'll learn from that experience and I'll help you learn from it. But the second thing that Parable helps with is you get to see how people have gotten started as well. It will help, those challenges that I mentioned, by the way, are an incredible opportunity for anybody who's trying to come up with an idea of what sort of business to launch on a problem to solve for other businesses, right? Like I said, like all businesses is solving problems at scale. So if somebody comes on in a case study and says, hey, one of my big challenges at the moment is X, that might be a good place for you to launch a business, right? Like go figure out, is this something that more people are experiencing? What are they looking for? How much are they willing to pay? Is there somebody else out there that's trying to solve that problem right now? What are their results? What are they like? It's such a good brainstorming exercise, and you'll get to see a lot of people who have entered it as well. And so I love that example. Like that'd be a perfect person that would be like, that's a cool ass experience, and I love beer. But yeah, so I would definitely say if you're somebody who is trying to figure out how to get started, that Parable is a very good place to do that.
Nice. Yeah, I love it, man. And you're sharing a lot on YouTube about this as well, right? Like if somebody wants to kind of get a little taste of the program, what's the best place to go to follow you? Is it on YouTube?
So the best place to do it is like, yes, follow me on YouTube. I am very, very heavy on YouTube at the moment. I publish 3 times a week there. Every Monday, wow. I do kind of like a.
How did you make time for me, man? Jesus.
Because I love talking to you, dude. I always make time for you. You want to do this every week? Let's do it. But so on Mondays, we do kind of like, I publish a newsletter every single week with kind of the top news in the digital nomad location independent space. And we do like a little fun, like video version of that where I dive in and shoot the shit on the different topics and stories, going a little bit deeper on like what I think about them. Wednesdays, we publish the podcast interviews on video. And then Fridays, I do what I call video essays, which are kind of more like I dive into some problems, discuss different things, so on and so forth. So that's a good place to do that. The best place, honestly, to get a taste of Parable would be to follow me on Instagram. I share some insights in there from the case studies and some of the things that we're learning, and kind of like tease out some of those things. And there's going to be more of that coming as we get more and more case studies. So
yeah, we'll link to all that in the show notes too for anybody listening and going, yeah, but where do I go? Don't worry.
Joinparable.com is the website, and you can get to anywhere from there.
And may I say, some sweet swag as well. You guys can't see him. He's wearing the Parable hat right now, and I want one. So I'll just saying, you one, man. There's some sweet swag to come as well.
You know what's funny is this logo was AI generated.
No way.
Yeah. So I went in. So I don't remember the website. I wish I could remember the website that I did this, but I kind of like typed in the name of the company, and I could select like design profile. So I'm kind of like, smart tech, like whatever futuristic kind of looking thing. And I found this one that I liked, and like one other one. And I sent it to a friend of mine who's a designer. I said like, hey, I really like this, but can you like toss in some parts of this one? And he came back in like 2 days, but I'd say 80% of like this was like AI generated, which is kind of cool.
Man, the robots are taking over already.
Yeah, we're done.
We're screwed. We're just, we're worthless already. I wanted to ask you some other questions about your experience as a digital nomad, because you're in Mexico right now, and I know you've spent a good bit of time there. So tell us a little bit about where you are right now and why you returned to this area, if I'm correct in assuming that. I think I am. And then just let's go into like some of the other places you've kind of called home over the last couple of years.
Yeah, of course. So at the moment, I'm in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, specifically in the Zona Romantica neighborhood of Puerto Vallarta, which is sort of like the expat neighborhood. It's also, I didn't know this when I first came here. So Puerto Vallarta is the gay capital of Mexico, and Zona Romantica is the gay capital of the gay capital. So it's so much fun, man. It's like, it's great. The parties are constant. It's a lot of fun. Not that I'm a big party person anymore, but anyway, so yeah, Puerto Vallarta is great because it's kind of like living in California, but on Mexican prices. So PV is a little bit more expensive than what you'll find in some other locations in Mexico, but you get a lot for that money, which is why we like it. Like right now we're paying $1,200 a month for this apartment. I have like a beautiful view of the ocean, a big kitchen, 1 bedroom, so we get quite a bit for our money. And the reason, like I was telling you before we hit record, that I really like Puerto Vallarta is it's a big city. So we have a good airport, we have a Costco, we have several Walmarts, we have a nice big shopping mall, like all of these things. But the city is sort of like spread out onto the ocean, right? So it's like not like one circle, it's kind of like elongated along the coastline. And because of that, like here in our area, sometimes I'm walking down the street and I feel like I'm in like some small Mexican village, not in like a big city. And so I think that is like a really nice sweet spot for me. And I also prefer, like a lot of people are in like Playa del Carmen and, some of these other places, Tulum, even though I've never understood the Tulum thing for long term. But the Yucatan gets really, really hot. Here it's a little bit like the temperature's a bit more mild, even though it's still like mid 80s, but that's mild for Mexico. And yeah, man, I really enjoy it. And I really think that this place has a lot to, I think, offer in the future. As more and more people come to Mexico, I think PV is really going to become more popular.
And you've traveled around Mexico a good bit too, as well. Is that right?
I mean, I think so, but also I'm realizing Mexico's huge, man.
It's massive,
so and it differs from like, like here in Puerto Vallarta is completely different to like Guanajuato, where I went a few months ago, and I was like, I didn't know this was Mexico. Do you know what I mean? So, I've been to a few places, but by no means a Mexico expert.
Yeah, I know. That's a funny thing. I think we underestimate that, especially like people coming from the US. We just don't realize how giant it is, and you envision what you think of as Mexico, and then you're like, oh, wait a second, no, there's a lot of variety in that country.
The other thing that like, not that this is like the Mitko air out your, issues and annoyances podcast, but like what really grinds my gears. Do you remember that? Like
Yeah,
that bit,
that's what
what grinds my gears? Yeah.
you just said two things that like took me back to like early 2000s sitcoms, like airing of the grievances with Seinfeld and the
Yeah.
Festivus poll, and grinding that really grinds my gears. So thank you for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned that you're going to Mexico. Like I said, before we hit record, I was just in a conference in Mexico City, and I spoke with some family friends in the US, and I mentioned I'm going to Mexico City, and they're like, "Are you insane? Do you know how dangerous it is there?" And I'm like, "It's a city of 22 million people. It's 3 times the population of Bulgaria. Obviously, there's going to be some bad characters in there." And for me, like this whole propaganda of if you step foot in Mexico, you're going to die thing is just ridiculous, because the same way that people live in Chicago and there's maybe some neighborhoods in Chicago that maybe you shouldn't go to because they're more dangerous is the same thing for Mexico City. Like, are there parts in Mexico City that you shouldn't go to? Yeah, don't. But like there's quite a bit of the city that's perfectly fine for you to like be and hang out in, and it's a beautiful city. And I think that so many of us people living in the US, or at least being tuned into the news and the kind of like what gets said about different parts of the world, is that if you're not in the US, everything is dangerous. And like the healthcare system's gonna like, you're gonna get like a dog spleen, or I don't know, something insane like that. And it's like, that's not true.
Yeah.
And so I like, if there's one thing that you take away from this podcast is like, please, 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 next time you travel to Mexico, don't go to a hotel zone and just stay in the hotel zone, because that's not Mexico, right?
Yeah.
Except for Cancun, because Cancun's kind of like a dodgy thing. Like actual like Cancun City's pretty sketch, so I would not go to Cancun City. But like
that's good advice.
Like
don't step outside the bubble in Cancun. Stay in the bubble.
It is one of those things where we landed our first time in Mexico. We landed in Cancun Airport, and we're like, yeah, right. Like the town of Cancun's fine, and our driver who's Mexican was like, no, like don't go there. But like, for example, I spent quite a bit of time in Merida, which is the capital of the Yucatan. It's the second safest city in North America after Montreal.
What? Are you serious?
And it's a beautiful city, incredible food. It's not on the beach, but it's like 45 minutes from the beach. It's absolutely gorgeous. Like it was one of the richest cities in the world at one point, if not the richest. Don't quote me on that. So you have these beautiful buildings, incredible avenues and like boulevards. Nobody talks about it, and it's one of the safest cities in North America.
What's it called?
And it's in Mexico. Merida. Merida. Yep.
Wow. Incredible. I've never heard of it. I had no idea.
And that's not something that you hear about on insert the blank news channel in the United States.
Yeah. No, you hear about beheadings in the desert by drug kingpins,
which is also true, right?
You have to take all these things with a grain of salt. It's funny you mentioned the dog spleen, like healthcare thing. Like, I mean, I find that hilarious because I get asked that same question a lot. Like, well, how's the healthcare in outside? Like, you're a foreigner there. Like, how does that work? And I'm like, I laugh. It cracks me up because it's so good and so affordable. Like just this week, like been to a dentist, been to a physiotherapist, like wife went to a doctor, a dermatologist, and like it's like pennies to get really great service. And if you need to speak in English, you can speak in English if you choose to go that route. And so it's always like these were the things that will scare people from going abroad. And they're the things that I love to debunk because I'm like, actually, none of that's true. I had those fears also. Like I was like, I'm not even able to get health insurance probably. And I'm like, oh, well, turns out you kind of don't even really need it. And if you do get it, it's like super cheap and it covers everything, like literally everything. It's amazing. So there's a little bit of things to get over.
This is the thing also about like getting outside of your bubble, right? And it's the truth is that the United States does tend to have some of the best doctors because the US healthcare system is so screwed up that we pay doctors so much that if you have the opportunity to be a doctor in another country and go to the United States, you're going to, because you're going to make incredible money compared to what you would in your country. So the US does have some incredible doctors. 100%, that's the truth. But then you have to play this thing of like, okay, well, I'm going to go get treated for this, but possibly go bankrupt. Or I'm going to go to like a B-level doctor in Spain and like not go bankrupt, right? So it's like you kind of have to play this like, I don't know. It's a very difficult thing that unfortunately keeps a lot of people away from traveling, and that is like scary, or like living in other countries. But it is one of my favorite things. Of not that I enjoy people getting hurt when I'm out or in traveling, but I had a similar experience where a friend of mine had to go to a doctor when we were in Bulgaria, and the Bulgarian healthcare system is nothing to compliment. I think it has a lot of issues, but like she had to get stitches, and we paid something like 50 leva, which is like $25. And my friend was like panicking. He's like, this is why you get traveler's insurance. And like, I'm going to call them up right now. And then like I paid for it cash because it was like easier. And I was like, yeah, dude, just like Venmo me $25. And he was like, what? Like, this is insane, So, and especially now with like medical tourism is such a big thing that I actually just overheard a conversation at the co-working space the other day where somebody was like, yeah, I can't remember who it was. I wasn't involved in the conversation. I was just being nosy. And he was saying like whoever it was that he knows like got sick, needed to go into the hospital, but like the hospital was like the private hospital, and she paid like less than what she would have paid for her like deductible in the US. And they put her up in like this like super nice hotel while she was getting better. So, there's so many options.
Yeah, big shout out to Insured Nomads while we're on the subject of international health insurance. Go to for your international health insurance needs. One thing I want to close with before I let you go is I am very curious about if you have any aspirations to put roots down somewhere, and if so, where on your travel, or even if not, where along your travels has been attractive to you?
So I'm sure that like there's no such thing as like forever and ever answers, because things can always change. Like we don't have children. So if we decide to have children one day, I'm not sure how that's going to change the equation, right? But for me, like I don't really see myself putting down quote unquote roots, maybe in the way that people would interpret that statement. But I'm a very big fan of this idea of home bases. Like find a few places around the world that you really, really love and build some sort of roots there, right? So Sarah, my wife, and I, we have an apartment in Varna in Bulgaria. It's actually like a family apartment, but for our wedding, we actually got gifted a plot of land just outside of the city. So we plan on like building there. So, like that is a home base for us in Europe. And when we're there in Bulgaria, we can go around and travel to other parts of Europe, right? It doesn't mean that we're changing cities every 2 weeks, but we have a home base there. The same thing with the US. Like our families are in the US. I love parts of being in the US. I love the city of Cincinnati where I grew up. So we want to buy a duplex there that we can kind of rent out to pay the mortgage, but then have the other part of it for ourselves. So that's a version of a home base. We really like it here in Mexico because I don't want to be in the winter in Cincinnati. So we're trying to find a place to have a home base here in Mexico. And PV is a place that we're testing for that, right? So I like that approach a lot more of like, there's no such thing as the perfect place in the world. And if there is, it's probably very, very, very expensive for you to do that, right? So like if you've got millions and millions of dollars, maybe you can find a perfect place, right? So yeah, and if you don't have that though, like I'm a big fan of there's places around the world that are perfect for different scenarios, right? Is PV perfect? No, it's not, but it's really perfect for what I want out of it right now. Is Bulgaria perfect? No, but it's really perfect for what I want out of it in the summer when I want to be in Europe and I don't want to pay a ton of money, but I'm an hour and a half away from Spain if I want to come visit there, right? Yeah. Same thing with the US. So that is my version of putting down roots, and it's something that so far has actually worked really, really well. And I look forward to kind of like expanding that theory.
What's your like cadence right now? Like how often are you usually in one place, or what does a year look like for you generally?
Yeah, so we do the summers in Europe. We do the summers in Bulgaria. As a friend of ours, another mutual friend of ours, like to say, I love saying I summer in Europe.
Yes. It's the
Even though he's
greatest
like,
thing to aspire to ever is
yeah.
like for a
Even
little
though
bit of
he's like,
context on that.
he's like,
I
it's
love that you
even though it's way cheaper than me living in the US year round, but I like to say I summer in Europe, right? So, my wife and I, we summer in Europe, in Bulgaria, and then we tend to do like the fall and the holidays in the US, although we really like doing like the early fall in Budapest as well. And then we've been doing this thing that we call Jan Feb, which is like the January, February, March part of the year, which keeps expanding. So we're doing we like doing that period in Mexico, but now it's like October, April, so it doesn't quite flow as well as Jan Feb. It just keeps expanding. So that's kind of like our cadences, like summers in Europe, or at least the northern hemisphere summer in Europe, and then we'll go to Mexico for kind of like the colder months of the year, and then in between those two, we usually bounce between the U.S. Like we do like what we call like restocking trips, like. I don't know, man. Like I have a hair product I like using, and I'll go there and I'll buy like 3 jars of it, right? Because the U.S. is really perfect for shopping. So it's like this kind of stuff. The holidays, we obviously go back to the U.S. to be with our family. And now, we're in our late 20s, so everyone's getting hitched. So there's like weddings that we need to go back to and that kind of stuff. So
do you make that kind of stuff a priority? Like, do you go all out to get back for family obligations or celebrations or whatever, or is it like sparse?
we play it by ear. Like we haven't yet had to make a decision of like, is this person a good enough a friend of ours?
Yeah.
Like we haven't had to like make that kind of call yet.
So there's a recipe, right? Because it depends on where you
Yeah.
are and the time of year and how frequent, like when are you going to be back already? And there's
Right.
a whole game to play.
Exactly. And so like right now, like we have friends that are getting married at the end of January, and we're like, okay, we're going to be back we are planning on being back for Christmas. So instead of going back at like the beginning of December, like let's go home like a few days before Christmas, then we'll spend all of January there to be there for the wedding, right? So like there's these adjustments. And we like to plot a few important things along the year and then plan our travels around that as much as we can.
Nice. Yeah, that's a sweet cadence. I'm also a big fan of the home base thing, and kind of have pretty similar aspirations actually. And I hear a lot of people going this route, so it's interesting. That's why I asked the question, because there's a lot of parallels here between people of this mindset that have been doing this traveling thing for a while, and then maybe like myself, like I've tried now like settling down in one place and just kind of traveling from here in a region of the world that I really like. But I do find like I'm craving a little bit more time back home with, family and friends back home. I also like where I came from. I'm not running from anything back there. I love there too. I just also happen to love here, and that's tough in a way, but like also lucky to be able to experience both. And then I'm like, but then I also want to go like try it somewhere else still. Like I want to go do 6 months in another place and try that. So everybody's pulling these levers.
The good news is only going to get easier, right? Unless there's some sort of geopolitical event that we can't, like COVID 2.0, which let's hope that's not the thing. I don't mean to call out that juju over the air, but like obviously geopolitical event we did not foresee, right? I don't know if that's geopolitical or whatever, doesn't matter. But like generally speaking, there's more remote workers and there's more and more people who are going to be doing what we are doing and what people who are listening to this are doing or want to be doing. And because of that, there will be providers that pop up for that, right? So Airbnb is built for short-term rentals. So the idea of going there and paying 6 months for an apartment in Mexico on Airbnb is kind of costly because you got to pay all of it up front, right? But now there's more providers. Like for example, I had the founder of Flatio on my podcast, which is a company that does midterm rentals in Europe, and they're trying to expand towards the U.S. market. But that's something where they figured out the legal logistics of being able to do what Airbnb does, but do it midterm. So like they do 2 weeks to 6 months, and you pay exactly like you would pay for, an apartment. So a lot of these things are going to be coming up. Obviously, we're seeing so many of these like co-living spaces popping up. There's like a different brand of co-living space every month now, which is great. And so it's, this market is only getting started.
Yeah. Another one on the Flatio parallel is a company called Spot a Home that's kind of big here in Europe. Similar concept. I have a friend here. They came and it's basically just month rentals, but like minimum of 30 days. And you basically end up paying just like a bit more than you would if you had like a long-term contract. So way less than an Airbnb. But they ended up renting through it for like 2 years, like just rented it for 3 months or something, and then just stayed in it for like 2 years. So you're right. There's all these services popping up. There's trying to make all this easier, and it is getting easier. There's more information out there than ever. There's more people running programs like you're running that are helping you find work. There's opportunities to find housing, to get visas. Digital nomad visas are popping up everywhere. I mean, it's a lot easier today than it was when you or I first dipped our toe in this water.
Yeah, and like the next thing also, like this is where like and we didn't get a chance to talk about this, so maybe at another time, but it's like the crypto overlapping, the blockchain kind of tech overlapping with what we do is the thing where I think is going to get really interesting over the next couple of years, because there is going to be this idea, which I think some people are already trying to do it, where you essentially are purchasing like an NFT, which gives you a ticket to homes around the world, right?
Yeah.
So like I had this guy on the podcast, Tynan. I don't know if you've ever heard of him before, but it's like the most interesting person in the world.
Yeah, I listened to that
Just
episode.
the weirdest person ever in the best way possible. I love that guy. But like he has a few friends with whom he co-owns a whole bunch of properties around the world. And because there's several friends in this, in this circle, it's not like super expensive, but they have this little closed community, and they're able to, they have an apartment in Budapest, they have a house in Hawaii, they have an apartment in Tokyo, they own an island in Canada, and they're able to within themselves communicate and say like, okay, I'm going to go into the Budapest apartment for 3 months. Anybody like want to come for that time? Am I cool to take that place? So I think that that's something that blockchain really enables in an anonymous way, where you don't have to trust, 10 of your best friends to do that with. And so I think that's going to be really interesting as well, where, imagine being able to pay like 10 grand a year, but you have 30 properties that you can go travel to all over the world. Right. So
yeah, it's going to be super fun to see where it goes. Mitko, man, this was awesome. I just looked at the clock and realized how long we've been talking here. Hopefully people are still listening to us. I don't care. We had fun. So thank you for taking some time to come join the show. I know you're busy right now, and you want to enjoy the sun there in PV, but tell us one more time where people can find you. And again, we will link to it in the show notes, but while people are listening, always good to hear the right links to go to.
Well, first of all, man, I gotta say thank you so much for having me on here. I'm so excited to get to talk to you. It's anytime we get to chat, man, it's always a pleasure. And I think you're doing a phenomenal job with the podcast. I know that the podcast is not that old yet, but you've done an amazing job. You're a very good interviewer, so keep it up. But yeah, in terms of the links, joinparable.com is the link for Parable if anyone is interested in that. And then other than that, if you follow me on Instagram at Mitkoka, is Mitkoka is where you can find me on social. And then the podcast is called That Remote Life. And then finally, the YouTube channel. This is the hardest one because I'm not cool enough on YouTube yet to have my own, like cool link. It's just search my name in YouTube and I'll pop up.
Awesome. And that's easy to spell as well. Mitko Karshovski.
Yeah, it's a breeze. Yeah.
Again, links in the show notes, people. Mitko, agreed. Always a pleasure. We'll do this again on one show or the other. Thanks for joining me, man. Enjoy your time in Mexico.
Gracias.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the two following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.